down, out the front door and out onto safety in the pavement. It's a great way for us to launch our book weekend and I, having Seamus here with us and Mickey to interview him, and hopefully you'll have a lot of questions to ask as the evening goes on. Now this is going to be streamed live, so just wanted to make everybody aware of it if they weren't, okay? So I'm going to get out of the way now and let us enjoy the evening. Thank you.
So hello everyone and welcome to the Central Library on the first day of Book Week NI, and it's a great privilege and so far good crack to be joined by Semas OReilly, an observer columnist, writes about parenting, very entertaining, but also has written a very entertaining and I don't want to say thoughtful, but I'm going to say thoughtful book about his family experience. Now if people don't know, he's the ninth in a family of 11 children, and from Derry, or from just out past Derry, out near the border.
Very near the border. On the border.
What do you call it? Where do you say you're from?
Millennium is the town.
Millennium.
It's just the sticks.
Aye, Millennium, the sticks. The suburbs of Derry. When you were about 5, Seamus' mother died, 43 years old, and you can imagine how difficult that was for the children, but also for the father, Joe, who I was going to not say hero because I thought he may have been here, but he is the hero of the centre of the book and the hero of the book. We'll hear why in the next while. So welcome to the Central Library. Welcome back to the Central Library, because you have been here many times as a child. People who work here says, I remember all them wains coming in.
Yeah, we were raised by this place sometimes. I mean, I remember there was just dreary, wet summers, very hard to imagine such a thing, but where we would literally be in here because, it was, as cheesy as it sounds, it was free. And also there was always so much stuff you could actually kind of find. I personally would credit, there are specific parts of this building which if I walk into them, I remember the first time I read Asterix. That's the first time I read Harlan Ellison. That's the first time I ever heard of Watchmen by Alan Moore. It's really weird. And because it kind of spanned primary school and secondary school and sort of like adult years as well, it's weird that even though it's obviously changed an awful lot, I'm literally walking in different parts of the building and I'm like, that's where I first read, I don't know, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream or something. Because you'd be sitting there waiting for, my dad would get home, like we ordinarily from primary school, we'd get off at 3:30 and for some reason I'd be like swimming or doing something, but you'd end up with a dead hour and we'd just come in here and you'd just be so sucked in and then you just feel a hand grabbing you to bring you out.
And you say in the book that one stage you phoned the library. And I wasn't sure what age you were, but you said you were about 10.
I was looking for a book of ghost stories, and I always use this as an example of Derry's sense of humour, because I think sometimes when it's represented in TV or in print, it just doesn't come across. There's a sort of a paranoid style to it. How bred in from very good reasons why people were paranoid in the past. But I rang up and said, here, is this the Central Library? And the woman on the phone paused and said, depends. Who's asking? To say that to a 10-year-old is just absolutely hilarious. And I've never forgotten it. Obviously, I thought it was just so gas. But the thing is, obviously, over the course of many, many years here, I think we might even have had our address blocked by the Central Library because there might have been a few overdue fines.
Yeah, I think this week they've announced that the fines are being scrapped.
Someone said that and I was like, oh my God. Is that why they finally let me back in the building?
Yeah.
I swear. I thought this was going to be that thing like whenever they say free speedboat and they use it as a way to get loads of criminals into the police station. And there's just like a cage drops around me and I'm just shipped off to Australia.
We were talking, I was talking earlier about who it would have been that would have says, depends, who's asking. And I think I have to own up that it was my sister, Patricia, who's been working here, who worked here for many, many years. And you know what, when I read that, especially when I hear that it was a child, I think, I can imagine our Patricia saying that because it's a
I
good
know
line.
It's cruel to children.
Yeah, it's a very good line. But you know, it's a book about memory as well, and it starts off. You know, the line is that whenever your mother dies, you get a new pair of corduroy trousers. That seems to be the rule. But it seems that the first clear memory you had, was of the wake,
Yeah.
and because it was obviously it was over a couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that all the time. That I remember. I mean, the example I gave in the book is I remember my first taste of a banana sandwich. You know, that momentous moment. But I don't remember being told my mum had died. I don't remember anything from the funeral, like not even like the vague sort of shapes and things. Nothing. I remember little bits from the wake, which are in the book. Obviously, I wasn't going to waste anything that I could remember. But it's weird how that works. Like, where memory is filed and how it works. And it's very annoying if you're trying to write a book based on those memories because you kind of have to structure things around it. But I'm lucky that I have 10 brothers and sisters, so I've got 10 wee external hard drives. The problem with that is you'd imagine it's like the Bourne movies where you've got like 10 people on like satellite laptops and all taken together, they'd create a perfect 3D image of the globe, when actually it's like having 10 cats and asking those 10 cats to pose for a photograph. Like they never actually all fully add up. So like every single version of this, every story in the book, 7 of them possibly agree and then 2 don't and 1 really, really doesn't. So even going down to the story, which is the title of the book.
Yeah, I was going to say that for people that don't know.
So the book kind of opens up obviously with my mum's death, and I was 5, 3 weeks before my 6th birthday, as I probably would have told you at the time. But still too wee to really get the sense of everything. And as anybody who's been to a wake or a funeral knows, kids are obviously going to be kept on a very short leash. They did this very admirably for the majority of the time. I was parcelled off to this aunt, to this uncle or a family friend. But for some reason I was let loose, stupidly let loose, for God knows how long. I'd like to think it was a short amount of time, but whatever happened, someone looked up and saw that I'd planted myself right in front of the front door, waiting for every ding-dong for people coming in. And I was the face that was greeting them as they were coming in. These horrified people coming to see my mum's, body. And what they found was me standing there, like 3 feet tall, ginger, beaming smile. Did you hear Mommy died? So I don't remember that, but the memory has been kept alive.
Do you remember saying that?
Nope. I don't.
Who told you?
Every single one of my siblings.
Oh.
Forever.
Do you remember the time?
Yeah. Oh my God, it's like their favourite story. So, and that's the sort of stories that they kind of created a sort of a weather vane for, or a sort of a compass for the story, for the stories in the book. Because what I like about that story is that it is inarguably quite funny, and if you tell it in this context, it'll make people laugh because they can imagine being the people, they can imagine being the kids, they can imagine being the people seeing it happening, going, oh my God. But it's also very, very sad, you know? I mean, you've got to imagine what it was like for one of my mum's friends opening the door and seeing me completely oblivious. I mean, there's almost nothing, like the only thing sadder than a child crying because his mum died is that a child doesn't even realise what's happening.
Yes. Do you think that you didn't realise?
Absolutely didn't, yeah. I mean, like 3 weeks later, I was asking when Mammy could stop being died, you know? Of course, because, I mean, it would be harrowing if 5-year-olds did understand it, I suppose.
And I have to say as well, of course, that yesterday was the 30th anniversary of your mother's death.
Yes.
And you were 5, and you know...
I'm now...
You know have a child who's coming up to you.
Yes, I did. So, and I was thinking about that. I did I wrote a column yesterday about being the 30 years and how really, what's the difference between 30 years and 29 days and 364? I mean, obviously there's not really a real difference, but there is a thing about, marking it with these big numbers, and the fact that I was going to be back here and with my dad and my sister and bringing my little son Rua there, that was really special to me, and it was weird having spent so much time with those memories in the last few years, because I know my mum better than I did then rather, because apart from anything else, I've just sat with my own feelings. I started this book with 5 memories of my mum, and it's a big centre point of one of the chapters, is a story which I've always kind of told, which is that I think I was in P4 in Nazareth House, and Mrs. Duffy, I think it was, told us, it was Mother's Day, and I used to love Mother's Day because everyone would be really nice to me. And also it didn't bother me. Like Mother's Day was like, oh God, poor wee boy. I was like, Mother's Day didn't mean anything. It wasn't like, oh my God, this is the day of all days. It was just not a thing. But I knew it made everyone else really sad. So all these taciturn dairy women who were usually like, quite, scornful and spiteful and, proper dairy teacher, just wouldn't take any nonsense. They were like tiptoeing around me like I was a wee ginger landmine. Not so Miss Duffy, who smartly said, okay, you do something different. Everyone else is making cards and stuff for their mammies. Why don't you just write down every memory you have of your mammy? And I wrote them down, and I only had 10. And I was like, oh God. Because this was obviously only, a few years after, but the way memory works, I just only had so many, and I was like so distraught by that. It was like a second bereavement. And what's terrible about that is I tried it again about 4 years later, and I had 5, and that's all I've had since. So even after the initial shock, I wasn't able to hold on to it. Like if I could find that piece of paper that I wrote when I was 8 years old, it would be worth any amount of money in the world. So I had 5 when I started writing the book, and I found 3 more, just from sitting with it and thinking about it and talking about it. And what you're saying about memory is, it's so part of the book. It's the biggest part of the book, because so much of grief is a function of memory, and it's if you remember how keenly you hurt, and if you remember just even the nice and lovely things, there's that thing where after you lose someone, you in my case anyway, it's almost completely impossible to look at a picture of them or to have these things. And then there's a certain point where you look at the old picture and you're like, oh, that was a nice day. Like there's a change that happens, and it probably happens kind of so gradually that you don't notice it. And for me, that happened with the memories of my mum. They popped up, and I was like, how come that's ready to come out? And so it ruined the chapter, because I had to then go and say, oh, by the way, I've come up with these other things. Yeah. So it did seem a bit strange, but I'm so happy. Like, if nothing else, the book has given me, 60% extra. Nice.
I have to say, of course, about the family. I wrote down, which you do in the book as well, of course. You're 9th of 11. I
am.
Just say, so am I.
Oh.
I'm 9th of 11 too. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Ah.
So you have Sinead, Dara and Shane, the big ones. Mm-hmm. And then Orla, Maeve, Mairead and Dervla. Are they all the middle ones?
The middle ones.
And then Kiva, who's here. And Fionnuala and Connell and yourself, of course. And I think everyone who reads the book, who comes from even a medium-sized family, will appreciate the categorizations. There's the big ones, the middle ones, and the wee ones. Tell us about when you were definitely the wee ones.
Yeah.
What was that like in terms of what happened in the house?
Well, it was a very ruthlessly enforced caste system. I've got a fellow wee here, so she'll rep me for this. So basically, the older ones, the 3 big ones, they were kind of like the sort of haughty aristocrats, untroubled by their station. They knew they were not going to be toppled, and apparently they actually told some of the older middle ones that if they got to a certain benchmark, like if they made their first communion or first confirmation, they'd become big ones. I discovered this when writing the book, and I was like, that's devious. It's like a parody of capitalism itself. It's like you too can be one of the ruling class, but like slowly but surely that ever receding horizon just never arrived. And maybe this hardened something in them. Maybe this is what turned them cruel, because the middle ones, if they had a creed or a prevailing ideology, it was, we are not wee ones. And they enforced the separation between themselves and the wee ones, which was enforced with an awful lot more chores than was necessary for us to be having. I'm really airing everything out here. Strenuous objection to us staying up past bedtimes. Ruled with an iron fist. My sister Dervla was particularly keen in that regard. Dervla actually it was pretty clear that she would actually physically murder you if you stayed up past. All of our bedtimes, for some reason, were connected to Australian soaps. So if you could stay up past, I don't know if this is official, but this is how I remember it. You could stay up, like even the dotiest little baby in arms could stay up, to watch Neighbours. the slightly more serious stuff of home and away meant you kind of would want to be like a little bit more mature. And then heartbreak high, obviously, if you were staying up that late, you were practically an adult, because they didn't like school and they had piercings. And so that was what it was like back then. And I'd say it's different now, only in the fact that we kind of all feel the same age, because my mum and dad had 11 kids in 15 years. So, we obviously have slightly different life experiences, but, so many of us now have kids and families of our own and stuff, and it's very...
But do you still feel like one of the...
I absolutely, and whenever we do regress as well, like when we go home, but we're so rarely all together in one place that it doesn't happen. But if somehow a building on the site where my dad's house still is was physically capable of holding the 43 people that now amass his immediate family, I reckon we'd go straight back into the same routines. Like if we all cram around the table, like there are people whose job just is to go and get the wine from the garage, and there's people who just would never even think to ask.
Yeah.
Just selfish people. Do you know what I mean? So
surely that's one of the benefits of being one of the wee ones. You don't have to. I discovered that because I have 7 sisters, and
so do I.
Don't be listening. And almost by default, that means I don't have to really. I've never had to think about things like our Philomena and our Patricia will sort all that out. In terms of the social things about Christmas and all that. Did you think you felt that as well, that you were? Or
we were very looked after, and I'd say there was an awful lot of intra-sibling raising going on. So the example I give in the book, which is particular to the events in the book, is my sisters Maeve and Orla. They devised a rota, and they certainly put their shoulders behind the wheel in the early days. And then this became a bit of a sort of a joke in our family, because they got a Young Citizens Award, kind of like a Pride of Britain Award. They went over to London. They got to meet Frank Carson for some reason. So in all the pictures where it's like them talking about how great they are as siblings and everything, it's like Frank Carson's in there, just looking like a big potato man. And I'm like, why was Frank Carson in all those pictures? Don't ask, it's fine. But we mercilessly teased them, because it suggested to us something like self-importance or putting yourself above the other pack. But in the book, I wanted to kind of redress that balance, because they did do, they did actually pull a big shift, and they also had, there's an example I give in the book, which is that for whatever reason, my dad couldn't face doing the Christmas presents, like literally picking them out. Maybe that was just something that he and my mum did. This is like 2 months after she died. And so they did it. I think they were 11 or 12. And sitting there with the Argos catalogues and picking things up. They picked the most expensive. It was a nearly ruinous year by all accounts. But the thing that made it saddest for me was that then when I was talking to them for the book, they said, yeah, but we only discovered where Christmas presents actually came from the year before. And I was like, oh God. Because I always just think of them as my big sisters. I don't think of them as 11-year-olds who just lost them. So there was that. But we all kind of pitched in with, we were all making dinners. We were all doing laundry. That was just kind of everyone pitching in.
And it came as a, I don't know why, it came as a bit of a shock to me, as in, this was all in the 1990s, which to people of a certain age like me was 3 weeks ago. But it was unusual. 11 in a family was, whenever I was growing up, common. But by the 1990s, it was kind of unusual, and you knew you were unusual too.
Absolutely. That's one thing I've always tried to put across to, well, particularly people who are not from here anyway, but like, I think sometimes I meet, say, Americans or English people who just presume that we all have 11 brothers and sisters, every Irish person. But like, we never, not only is it very unusual, but we knew it was unusual. Like, we couldn't not, like, we never were like, oh, that's just our way. We were like, no, there's nobody, don't ever see, there's not people on TV who've got 10 brothers and sisters, there's not anybody in our class. So we knew we were kind of, like, the minibus that we travelled in was a constant source of embarrassment. If you get into a 13-seater white Talbot van every day to go to school, you'll notice that you're getting into a 13-seater white Talbot van, nicknamed with some inevitability, the O'Reilly Mobile. Like, I think it's in the book, we look like a volleyball team of young offenders. And like, that's not something that you kind of just get used to. My older brother Dara, winces to remember that he used to make us all assemble in primary school in age order by shouting, "O'Reilly!" Can you imagine? Can you actually imagine? Like, I can't imagine that, and I was there. I mean, just awful. But it was, so that sort of stuff like we were aware of, but it also was, there's loads of stuff now I look back and I'm still surprised. Like, people would ask stuff like, well, when did you even use the bathroom in the mornings? And I'd be like, I don't actually know. That's right, I think I used to go outside sometimes. Like, because you literally couldn't use the toilet without a 2-week appointment. Like, or there'd just be always someone on the phone. Like, constantly, all of my sisters were constantly on the phone.
Because at one stage it was 6 teenagers?
Yes,
Right?
between 99 and 2000, I think it was, my dad would have been 51, I think. And he had 6 of his 7 daughters were teenagers at once, I think. And one of them's here tonight. Sorry, bring her down. And so there's a lot of slamming of doors, and I just, like...
Were you aware of that? Or you just oblivious?
Again, like, I can't imagine what it was like, and I was there. Like, and also the fact that my dad is, you know, very, very loving, very, I'd say, superlatively loving man, and very good with his emotions compared to most men of his age and vintage, and you know, a rural Fermanagh man. But even still, how do you help people through that? You know, adolescence is hard enough, but like 6 teenage daughters at once. So yeah, loads of the stuff that I ended up kind of going through for the book. Yeah, it was almost like I was reading about someone else's life. I was like, surely I would remember if I had 6 teenagers. But I did the maths and I was like, fucking hell.
But it's funny, you have a nice wee line in the book. I think it's your wife almost accuses you of, not accuses you, she thinks that it's almost like a party piece. Whenever you're out in London, whenever you're out with people, and you know that you have this fact ready, and at some stage it's like your greatest hit. You know, it's like, yeah, 11 of us.
Yeah.
But also there's an interesting thing, and I'll ask you about the reaction, but also you have an interesting technique as well, because you kind of let people know quite early on in the answer that your mother died. Why is that?
Oh, I can like, I think everybody in that situation does. Well, I've just had so many times where I've said, oh, I've actually got 10 brothers and sisters, and the immediate answer, about 15% of the time, is, Jesus, how did your mother cope? This happened to me several times in the last few days, just talking to people randomly, not people on this book tour. That was very insensitive of them. And I'd say, oh, well, actually, my mum died when I was very little. And then they get a bit offended. I was like, So I try to streamline it. I say, well, I've got 10 brothers and sisters. My mum died when I was very little. I just do it as a little 1-2, because you kind of have to, just to give people a soft landing. Yeah. The example I give in the book is my friend Charlotte's Swedish mum, who gave me the best ever response. She says, no harm on her at all. She was, I did the same thing. I said, oh, I've got 10 brothers. She was amazed. And she was fascinated with the pronunciation of Irish names. All of my family have got Irish names. And she couldn't make either to their hair of Kiva or Dervla. He's like, oh my God, what people are crazy. And then I said, my God, how did your mother cope? And I said, well, actually, my mother died when I was very little. And she said, I'm not surprised. And her daughter, Charlotte, literally was like, Mom, so upset. And everyone else around, there was like a little dinner table kind of people. Everyone's like, and I was pissing myself laughing because it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard in my life. And I was just like immediately making it clear that it was, to me it was the best reaction I've ever had, because it was just completely punctured all that sort of not false, but well-meaning, but just worshipful regard for a thing where sometimes you kind of let people away with putting their foot in it, or in her case, just like punting it deliberately. So yeah, I try and get ahead of it sometimes to avoid it.
But it's always a good, I used to do that as well. And then you just go, 11 of us now. And it was the same, your poor mother. And that's another 5 minutes. Yeah,
exactly.
Basking in the glory.
Yeah. Or another 5 minutes of them feeling bad about it. And sometimes you can pick your battles. Yeah.
So your daddy, Joe, who can't be here, but he has been out at some of the events.
I've banned him from coming to anymore because he was signing books last night.
Well, you know, I thought he was the main character
He
in
is,
it,
he
you know.
is. He's the
Very,
star.
very subtly, but he is
Yeah.
it's his story. He sounds great. Tell us about the supermarkets, because he seemed to enjoy his supermarket. He would have pressed the green, you know, the wee smiley face green for.
Well, I was maybe going to read that bit, if that
Good.
makes sense.
Well, do you want to do that now?
Do you want to do that now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, this is going to be truncated because it's quite a long bit, but...
No, don't truncate.
I think it's David Sedaris said, if you read for any longer than about 7 or 8 minutes, your best friend will slit your throat. So try not to do it too badly.
What was it? Was it West Side Stores? Was that?
It was West Side Stores. Do you know how many people have come up to me? That's the thing that they were most astonished about, was that they'd completely forgotten about West Side Stores.
And was West Side Stores crazy prices beforehand? I had this discussion with my wife. I thought maybe it was Stewart's, but maybe it was crazy prices. This is just in case anybody doesn't know where Tesco's is now in Quayside.
I actually think I
for
did.
about 3 weeks it was West Side
I
Stores.
think I did get it wrong. My dad punched me. Hopefully no one will talk about it. Okay. Oh no, it's not where I'm thinking.
It's okay.
Here we go.
It's live on the internet, so it's
Daddy
okay.
can be a difficult customer. So this part of the book, I'm talking about how much I'm doing a lot of stuff about how amazing my dad is, but then I'm like, I have to pull this back because, like, if you meet the guy, you know he's a human being, and this is an example of him being a human being. Daddy can be a difficult customer. On one occasion, he spent so long arguing with a pleasant young cashier, I think my soul actually left my body. The items he was trying to buy were not, she insisted, part of the deal he was citing, and if he just handed over the extra £2 that was due, really not that much at all if he thought about it, we could all be about our business. Daddy remained both literally and figuratively unmoved. The deal says 3 for 2, he declaimed, with the haughtiness of an archduke on the Titanic, demanding spots on the lifeboat for him and his 8 fur coats. That's for the smaller packs, sir, she replied. If you could just read I did read it, he said with great exasperation, as if we were not holding up an entire shop's worth of customers. And this woman were not a cashier, but a free-roaming lunatic who had entered his home and demanded he set fire to his trousers. I read the small print, he repeated, and that's not made clear anywhere. He had already been holding up the line for a few minutes, but it was clear he was just warming up. I think I had spotted this might happen earlier, since my dad's gaze had seemed shiftier than usual, as if he knew he might be skirting the rules a bit and was preparing for the confrontation. There could have been another way, I'm sure. Had the cashier approached the issue with a light touch or a note of good humour, my father could have been argued down. She was open-faced and pretty, which made this experience all the more painful for my 13-year-old self, but resolutely unwilling to haggle. She also hadn't realised she was standing face to face with God's one true perfect miser, one whose frugality was radicalised anytime he felt fobbed off or ignored. Tudding was audible behind us, and those shoppers who enjoyed the company of their own children began steadily decamping to other lines in the hopes that they might see them again before they died. We were in West Side Stores, which had formerly been a supermarket called Crazy Prices. When I think about the evolution of Derry, I'm less likely to think of things like border checkpoints and armoured cars, both of which saw a precipitous drop in numbers during my childhood, and apt to recall places like Crazy Prices. Crazy Prices, as its name suggests, was a shop whose branding might seem slightly or perhaps wildly insensitive nowadays. Its titular conceit was that the store's contents were so bafflingly discounted, so preposterously inexpensive, that they raised a very real question about the mental health of the proprietors. Their staff, and possibly their customers, were also implicated in this contagion of madness, branded throughout their location with bulging eyes and outstretched tongues. These prices, they implied, were so dribblesomely inscrutable that even to glance in the direction posed a very real risk of derangement. These prices weren't merely cheap, you understand, they were crazy. And any attempt to comprehend them was as pointless as considering the cosmic gnawing depth of insanity itself. You must understand, their day-glow ads seemed to say. If you step inside, you may never recover from these prices. But this was as nothing that compared to what came next. After Crazy Prices merged with Stewart's, another locally owned supermarket chain, it became West Side Stores. It was known that the merger necessitated a fresh start with a new brand identity, one that didn't favour either Stewart's or Crazy Prices. They landed on West Side Stores, perhaps because this first store was on the western side of the city, or maybe their numerous locations outside of Derry were all in the western part of Northern Ireland. I could have looked this up, but I decided not to.
just make it up.
Yeah. Or just phrase it like a question. Book writing 101. The exact meaning was opaque, but the supermarket further muddled things by leaning into the western part of the name, specifically by branding each of its stores with the tropes of the American West. Everything was Western themed, from West Side Sam, their giant cowboy mascot, to the famed cowboy supper meal that became a local delicacy. Produce was laid out around the store on prop barrels, and staff names were displayed on little sheriff's badges. It's odd to think that there must have been sober meetings about all these bizarre marketing decisions, but in any case it worked. Such was its cultural impact, Tesco retained the cowboy supper there, and there alone for many years afterwards. Someone told me you can still get a cowboy supper in some places. That's the kind of feedback I get from my fans. But what irked me most of all was that even if one presumed that the Western branding was a vote winner in 90s Northern Ireland, it still didn't make sense. West Side Stores, as I pointed out to my dad on several occasions, was clearly a pun on West Side Story, meaning the appropriate terrible size and branding they should have gone for was that of mid-century New York, Manhattan gang wars, and musical theatre. Now, are you going to honour the deal or not? Yeah. My father continued doggedly at the Stetson-wearing teenager who glowered across the counter. This scenario would have been embarrassing enough, but the shopping in question, the trolley load holding up today's order of business, was a hyper multi-pack of toilet rolls. Plain white, non-quilted toilet rolls. And in a quantity that was, as always when we bought anything, not just large but alarming. Buying toilet roll is uncomfortable at the best of times. There is always that fear, silly but present nonetheless, that your server will glance disgustedly at the paper you're purchasing and give you a look like they plan to pin your photo on a notice board in the back room somewhere, lining up profiles of all the disgusting people who live locally and still do shits. So standing beside a trolley that bore a precarious toilet roll, so tall it dwarfed my father, myself, and the steadily growing line of discontented shoppers behind us, was worse still. My heart dried out and curled up inside my chest. My father continued his dissertation on why he should be spared a £2 surcharge for the 6,000 toilet rolls he was buying, the cheapest such product available at that time outside the former Soviet Union. I could picture in every corner of the shop an endless line of boys who were more popular, or girls I fancied, turning to see me standing there, the puny, acne-ridden progeny of this incontinent Scrooge.
Very good. But he knew about priests.
He did.
He had almost encyclopedic knowledge of.
Yeah, well,
did he know them all, or did he read books?
Well, that's the thing. Is he probably did read books about individual priests.
The directory.
That'd be the kind of him. But I used to think that my dad knew every single priest in Ireland because my dad knows every single priest in Ireland. That's the line I went with. And my dad corrected me when I read the book to him and said, he took very vociferously against it. He didn't actually correct me on many things in the book. He said, no, that's a complete exaggeration. And I was like, okay. And after 5 minutes, and I'm sweating here because I'm reading the book, so I'm worried what he thinks about the whole thing. And finally, we haggled it down, and he agreed that 70 to 80% of the priests in Ireland would be acceptable. So we grew up, my dad was, obviously, my parents are both very much people of faith, strong Catholics, but they were also involved in loads of sort of extracurricular Catholic activities. You know, they did marriage counselling with the church. They did volunteered at this marriage encounter. They were also, my dad was on the vocations council. They did stuff for different schools and hospices and everything. So they're very, very committed, and they put their money where their mouth was. On top of that, we read at Mass. They were both, Eucharistic ministers, and all that sort of stuff. So growing up, it was just a thing that you would have, you know, a close personal relationship with the church, and that meant priests. And so I haven't got any bad stories of the type that have, you know, become horribly predominant, and which are, you know, they're not part of my story. But in the course of my life, some of the most strange and funny stories have been to do with priests, including one time we came back from I think we were visiting my Auntie Catherine. We came back home, and a priest had broken into our house. I call him Father Finbar Staples in the book, so I will call him Father Finbar Staples here. But there's an excellent little coda to this, which I'm going to add. So we got back, and my dad hadn't seen Father Finbar in a while. And what had happened is he'd gotten there, seen that we were out, and he said, sure, Joe won't mind. He was with his nephew, and he got his nephew to jimmy open an open window, skinny in, opened the window, went in, and then stayed there for like 2 hours. And he'd eaten like some hot dogs, he'd eaten loads of crisps, a jar of olives, like loads, like helped himself to a sandwich, a couple of beers, and he was sitting watching Match of the Day. So that's a funny story. But the funniest thing is my dad's like, Father Finbar, or whatever his actual name was. And he just thought it was like, he couldn't understand why it was a strange story. Even to the point where I read him the excellent and very funny story that I make of it in the book. And he kind of laughs a little bit, but he's like, I don't understand why you think that is such a funny story. He was a friend. And I hadn't seen him in a while. It's like, Daddy, I've got loads of friends, but they're not breaking into my house. Like, but it's like, is every single house in Catholic Ireland like just a network of clerical bird feeders where you just have to leave? Go on, just leave some olives out for the priest. Go on, go away. Shoo him away. Like, it's completely bananas. And that kept coming up. Anyway, I get a message on Twitter saying, oh, I read the book, I really loved it, blah, blah, blah. By the way, you didn't mention me in the book. I was like, what do you mean? Well, you mentioned that the priest broke in, but you didn't mention the nephew. That was me. And I was like, oh, I didn't know about this. And then my dad said, oh yeah, it was actually, there was a little boy who kind of did whatever. I was like, oh my God, so you're part of it. I'm so sorry, I'll have to put it into further versions. So I'm trying to correct the record. But that was just a normal thing. Or like the priest whose name I changed.
Well, the name that stuck out with me, well, I didn't, the only one that struck me as being completely fake was Father Huck Balance.
Yeah.
And because he's the priest that ran the cinema here, I thought that's Father, is it Con from Long Tower. So that's one of the first things I asked you today was, why did you change? But it was like, that's probably sensible.
Well, yeah, because I didn't want...
Sorry, just to say, nothing, the priest doesn't do anything bad in the book.
No, that's the thing, but also you just don't want to... Like, I've changed the names of pretty much everyone except the immediate family members and very close family friends, people I'd be in contact with, just because she's just told to do that, basically. So they said, oh, you probably have to change those unless you want to contact the people. I was like, well, I don't want to go down the road of like trying to contact all these people who could now be in their 70s and 80s, and also some of the stuff I say is definitely exaggerating to the point where, like, are they going to have a humour pass at it and say, like, one of the things I say about aforementioned priest who ran a cinema, who was a great guy who we really liked, but I do pretend that he used to shake children upside down so that their sweets fell out, because you can't take sweets into cinema. That's obviously, I'm stretching for the joke there, and I would get that joke, but maybe he wouldn't, and then it's change the name. Anyway, so they say change the name, and I'm like, well, I'll change the name for that reason, but like if it's actually to obscure who the person is, I don't know how many people in Derry are not going to know the priest that ran a cinema. Yeah. Like, it's one of the, first of all, it's just one of my favourite things as a priest with a side job. Like, I just always think it's so good. And the fact that it was the contrast, because he was such a decorous and sort of dignified guy, and just had that great voice, and he was just, stern when he needed to be, but he was human as well. He's a really very kind of like priest TM, And he had all the authority of God up there. And then, literally 2.5 hours later, you'd be going for the matinee to see Jurassic Park, and he'd be there. All right, guys, coming in, blah, blah, blah. Shaking the child, making sure all the weren't bringing in outside confectionery. And that contrast to me said so much about Derry. It said so much about the church. It said so much about our family that just a slight angle to the rest of the universe that some of these stories seem like.
There is a chance he might start calling himself that now.
Well, he can have. I have something like a 600 entry spreadsheet of very stupid names that I use for. I go through, and once I've used them, I kind of cut them off. But the priests are always. I mean, that's what Father Dead is basically made of. Is how many stupid names for priests can you come up with? It's just so much fun.
And it was him that blessed the caravan?
It was Father Huck Balance who blessed, because there was Father Bun Hanratty as well is another one.
That nearly sounds like a name,
But it does sound like
a real person.
Father Finbar Staples, surprising why people thought that was a real one, that's fair enough. But yeah, Father Huck Balance, he came out and he blessed the caravan. So there's like...
That was a favour to your father, wasn't it?
Yes.
We think. Or was it a service another side job he did?
Well, he did. Well, he actually had a special thing that he did for caravans, which makes me think, just how long is like the textbooks they give them? It's like, this is what you do if it's a 26-foot ABI award caravan, it's one thing. But yeah, he went through and did every axle and all the wheels and then the whole thing. But we thought this was so normal. That's the sort of thing that happened. You sometimes used to see that on the news, the Irish football team are going away and the bishop came to bless the planes. Notions of ourselves. We're going to have we're going to Spain, so we better get the priest out. Another thing my dad corrected me on, I said he was in full vestments. And he said, no. This is, you're embarrassing yourself now. And the book is locked, by the way. It's 2 weeks before it's released, but I can't change anything. And I'm like, oh God, what have I done? He says, he was in a cassock, okay? So what's that? It's a bit like vestments, but it's different. Okay. Sorry. And that was the other thing. It was really lovely getting to read it to my dad, but he was perfect because he would. There's a point in the book where I talk about how he lifted a car, my dad, and he lifted a car, 2.4 tons of Swedish engineering, the Volvo 240, and it was one of those things where he obviously just was seized with adrenaline because my older brother Dara had got his leg trapped. So his leg was literally being slowly broken as it rolled back. So, and he just came out, lifted the whole thing off him, the one end of it. And Dara crawled away, obviously very shaken. And my dad was like, obviously so bananas with the adrenaline that he had just lifted a car. And 20 seconds later, he was talking to my brother about how to release the wheel arch in a way that it won't work again. He was back to being an engineer. It was over that quick. So I always thought that was a really funny snapshot of my dad. And like he could do this superhuman thing and just there's no fuss. And to some extent, that's kind of what our whole childhood was. Him doing this superhuman stuff every day with no fuss. But the funny thing is I told him that story. I read it to him. And in the chapter I say, this is even true today. While writing this book, I told him this story. And he laughed and laughed and then gave me an 8-minute long description of the electric wheel lock mechanism for a Volvo. So we're going to take it to another level, because that's written in the book. I read it to him. He laughs. And he, again, gave me the same speech about the electrical wheel release for a Volvo. I was like, that is the most absolutely perfect thing.
And you write in the book that whenever you were, I can't remember, was it the caravan or some vehicle, he says, I'll find out the year, and do you need the registration number for it, for the book, which is...
That's the thing, because he's threatening to write his own book called Did You Hear Shamey Lied?
Oh,
and you'd think it would be like juicy stuff that I've said about like relatives or, demeaning to him, because I do turn him into a complete cartoon. So like, but he's not upset about any of that. He's upset because I said that we bought that caravan in 1991. No, that was 1990. I can assure you. And he says it was such world. He's always so annoyed that other people don't know the things that only he could know. Like it's like he used to do that. He'd tell us that someone had died. It'd be like an old priest, and he'd be like, "That's another priest that I mentioned in the book. Father Hustings Lafarge has died. Father Hustings Lafarge has died." And we're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear. Who is this? Mm-hmm. You know Father Hustings Lafarge?" It's like, no. It's a guy he hadn't seen since the 70s. He's talking to his children. Like he has this quirk of just always wanting things to be literal. He's got an engineer's mind in that way. So to some extent, it was nerve-wracking reading him the book because I didn't want it to be, because he's quite a funny guy, but we have different senses of humor. So some of the things I thought were very, very funny.
Did you get any stories from him that you used that weren't about registration numbers and names of priests? But did he give you an insight into what it was like for him?
Yeah, he did. And I think, obviously, as I say, I'm making him a cartoon at certain points of the book, but at other points, I usually that stuff, the funny stuff, is to kind of balance the worshipful regard that we have for him. And he was actually very...
He did some amazing thing, like the trip to Spain, which is amusing as well. But he took upon himself to take you all thousands of miles to Spain.
Yeah, something like
in the car.
I can't remember what it was. 4,000 or 5,000 mile trip or something. With one phone call at the start to say we're leaving Derry, and then 5 days later we are in Spain, and then my auntie came and picked us up. He plotted it all out with maps. He had because we were going through Spain and France. I think we went through Plymouth. So he had to do all of that, analog, of course. But he loves all that stuff. He loves kind of planning things out and doing things. But more the emotional side of it. This is 9 months after his wife has died. He's got 11 kids. It's, a big undertaking at the best times. I mean, can you imagine? Like, I've been saying this a lot, but I genuinely think I should be on the Late Late Show every night because I rear one child. Every single day, covered in yogurts, hurting myself on Lego.
Yeah.
I am a Nobel Prize. I should be at least in the shortlist for a Nobel Prize. And then, how on earth did you do this with 7 kids, 8 kids, 9 kids, 10 kids, 11 kids? As we always used to say, with alarming regularity to him, why did you have so many of us? And I know that as the 9th, I'm, kind of talking myself out of a job, but like, I'll take it, like, just for him to have an easier life. And he would always say something very sweet. He'd always say, "Oh, sure, which of you would I give back?" Which is very sweet, except that we always then immediately start suggesting candidates.
But
kind of ruins it.
I found it interesting whenever you talk about the friend of your mother, Patricia, who, because your mother, we haven't talked about your mother at all, and you had very few memories, but she had letters that your mother sent, and it's an interesting way that you put it, almost as if, because your mother and father had all these children, but Patricia was almost the only one that she could say, we're having another child with, and not be judged. Is that the sense?
Yeah, that was really a really amazing insight from Patricia. So Patricia is my mum's oldest friend from, like, I think primary school all through, and she's still with us. She was just at the event I did last night. It's lovely to see her. She gave me these letters. There's 11 letters, something about 5,000 words in total, in my mum's handwriting. Just had that real shock and awe. There's something different about that, the handwritten feeling of it. And they're just everyday commonplace things. It's her talking about going up and seeing her daddy, or going up and she was always running around and seeing people in hospitals, and always seeing people in, kind of caring for them. You get across just the saintliness of the one, which is completely true. The fact that I'd be walking down Shipkey Street on a random day when I was like 10 years old, and someone would stop me by the face and say, "Are you Sheila O'Reilly's boy?" And they'll tell me some lovely thing that my mum had done for them. So that is absolutely all true. But what I loved about Patricia growing up was that she would tell you, like, the bad stories. She would tell you about how she was a wild suck up at school, and she'd say, she'd kind of dob you in a bit if you were like, if you were talking in class, or things like that. She gave those extra little bits of piss-takey stories, I can say, very mild, but that added so much warmth and realness, because that thing, if you just hear about a saint, it's very hard to get a handle on them. But if you hear about a saint who didn't have a great singing voice, you're like, okay, I can imagine this. Or someone who was a bit up themselves when they were 10, like, God, who wasn't? You want to hear those things. Or couldn't tell a joke to save her life, could never remember, the start of a story or the end of a story. Those kinds of things really added so much. And so when she gave me these letters, because she's always been one of the finest ambassadors for my mother's memory, it was like that final piece, because then I was hearing it literally in my mum's own words. And they were remarkable, because she's going off, she's doing all these nice things, and she's asking about Patricia, always asking for her. And then, like, 2/3 of the way through the letter, she'll just say, "Sadly, I don't have great news. I've been to the doctor," and, she would talk about her own problems, which, I mean, if that was me, I'd be like, I'd be so self-absorbed. And that seems to be the exact opposite of what she was like. She was the least self-absorbed person. So self-absorption is not genetic, it seems like. But she kind of came to life through that, and through other letters I was able to get from other people, and also from talking to people, having the ability to talk to people, even my family members, siblings, because, like, as much as we were very close, and we probably are much more comfortable sitting and talking about the old days than loads of families might be, from my experience, I think a lot of people come into our family and are amazed by how close we are and how warm we are, and we're very huggy, and we'll still tear strips off each other, obviously, over stupid things. We're not the Brady Bunch, but even still, it was so lovely for the last few years to just have an excuse to go on a WhatsApp group we have, and just say, "Does anyone remember Mammy getting stung by a bee from a can of lilt?" Cue 200 messages arguing over if it was a can of lilt, or if it was a can of 7-Up, or I don't care about the can, could you just tell me, I'm writing something. And it became the thing which I had like this, you know, like you see in old like timey movies, like there's a guy from the press, he's got a fedora with a hat that says press. I had this pass where I could just ask, I could call up my brother Shane at 2 p.m. in the middle of a work day and say, here, what do you remember about Mammy's funeral? Like, there's very few, even as close as we all are, there's very few times I'd have ever asked those kinds of questions. And it was really, really nice being able to do that. It was like I had this complete excuse, this carte blanche. And so I would, and I'd ask, what do you remember about summer holidays? 600 messages later, people are having rows about whether the boy they saw choking was in Rill in Wales in some camping holiday or if it was in Mosney. And we finally worked out it was Mosney. It had to be Mosney because everyone around just dropped to their knees and started praying rather than doing first aid. I was like, that had to be in Ireland. And from that, you know, everything kind of came back to life.
Yeah.
People would tell me about their experiences with Mummy and what they knew. I mean, as much as I do compare them to cats posing for a photograph, it's been such a joy, and it's been just lovely having that excuse to.
And people still, Patricia says she remembers your mother and all that, so you still get it. We're going to be winding soon because I think some people hopefully will have questions. But I found it interesting, you talked about, as an adult, you and your wife were in Bilbao on a wee holiday, and everything come back to you at that stage? And it sounds very cruel, but I almost felt that you thought, God, I was a really annoying child.
Yeah.
You know, but you can sort of, it's almost like a realization that you behaved that way, and I'm sure you weren't that annoying, behaved that way, you know, with the fascination with dinosaurs and with, you know, everything. Because it was almost like dealing with the grief.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I discovered was, everybody would like to think of all their negative character traits and like blame them on something so tragic that people can't judge them for it. So there's a little sprinkle of that as well. It's like, oh, I'm sorry that I'm just so horrible, but my mum dies. Okay, be really annoying. But as a kid, it is true. I was obsessed with knowing things and very much that kid that was walking around braying facts, dude. You had no chance of getting away from me. I once followed my Uncle Frank around his own house, laughing at him because I'd asked him if he knew what deciduous meant. I think I was 6 years old. Of course he knew what deciduous meant, but he was like, no, why don't you tell me? And I was like, you don't know what deciduous meant? Everyone, he doesn't. Just like marching after him and falling into my trap. So those kinds of stories I was always told about growing up, like, oh, do you remember you did this or that thing or whatever? And one of them was spiders. I was really obsessed with spiders for a while, but like it was every 3 months you would meet me and I'd be obsessed with dinosaurs. And then it was the planets. And then I think that's a lot of little boys, to be honest. And girls, I presume, as well, but certainly was for me. And my son currently, he's just gone from dinosaurs to planets, literally. He's 3. And I'm like, oh my God, maybe it is genetic. But I knew loads of things about spiders. I think it was because I was kind of scared of spiders, so I thought I'd read loads of books about them and encyclopedia things and just kind of cure myself of the fear of it. And I knew that they were not good mothers. I knew that they were atypical maternal instincts, or amaternal, I suppose. And it all came back because I was in Bilbao at the Guggenheim, and there's this beautiful sculpture called Maman by Louise Bourgeois. There's actually a few of them, all with different names that are like Mama, Mother, Princess, in different places. But it's just stunning. It's a striking, huge thing, and it's got a little clutch of eggs underneath it, sort of all bronze and marble. And in the little note, I'm reading it, it says, it was a tribute to mothers and motherhood, because it's like guarding its eggs. And for some reason, I went, no, spiders are really, really bad. They run away from the kids. They just lay them off on a big leaf, and then, or they just crawl all over the dad, and then they go away. And as I was saying it out loud, it was like my throat got hot, and my eyes started to get burned. I was like, this is why I remember this. It's because clearly, like, it doesn't take Sigmund Freud to work out what I was saying. Like, maternal abandonment or a dad being left to look after these things had really stuck it in my brain. And I was like, oh my God, imagine all the people I told that to then. That, like, how obvious it must have been coming from me and them knowing who I was. And that was just one example of a time when I was like, oh God, this is like, it's going to be a lifetime's worth of working out how these things work.
Did you feel better after it?
I did, yeah. And it wasn't like, it didn't like ruin the holiday. The holiday was ruined because we went to Bilbao, and it's a really nice place for 2 days. And we were there for 4 days, and also we had no money. Like, I'm sure Bilbao was really nice if you got more money than we did. I don't know what windfall we were expecting between booking the flight and but like we got there and we literally had about like 25 quid or something. Oh, it was really bad. But yeah, those moments where you're like hit with, because I was processing death at 5, so lots of that would have been fossilized.
Yeah.
And to some extent, you're better off at that age. I mean, better off, whatever that means. You don't maybe have it. I have always thought maybe if I was a teenager, it would have been so much harder, definitely immediately. If I was in my 20s, if it was right now, you know, it could be harder because you're so resilient and your brain is so plastic at that age. But then at the same time, you've got less of experience with the person, and that's tough. And also you have to grow up without the person. I mean, that's tough. So, I mean, Jesus, how can you can't really compare anything. But certainly one thing I realized was a lot of my ways of dealing with it were a child's ways of dealing with it. And they're not questioned, because, I mean, probably now they would kind of give you very specific counselling, specific for children, but I looked fine, I was grand, and to be honest, in the grand scheme of things, I was. But, you know, cut to me, age 30, standing in front of sculpture crying.
Shout at a spider. Yeah.
You're a terrible mother.
Yeah.
Please, I'm
Yeah.
taken away by my wife.
I have to say, it's a very happy book for a book that starts with a mother dying at the age of 43, leaving behind 11 children. You know, I don't think there'll be another one like it.
Oh.
You know, for good reasons as well, hopefully. But Seamus, thank you very much. It was very entertaining. Has anyone got any questions? First of all, did anyone know any of the O'Reillys, including the mommy and the daddy? Yes.
Show of hands there, I can't actually say.
Not quite.
No,
I know that people who work in the library. Any questions? We're officially over, so you know, don't feel obliged.
What drew your mummy and daddy from Fermanagh to Derry? And how did your daddy cope afterwards with his family?
Well, the weird one, despite the fact he spent his entire adult life giving the staff at the birth registry premature arthritis. My dad was an only child, so he didn't actually have many immediate, but he did have cousins and stuff like that. But he came to Derry for work. He worked for the water service in Altnagalvin. So he was there from 85 till, I think, about 2010, I think. And he worked for the water service just in Enniskillen. So it was a good job, and you know, they both grew up very rural in Fermanagh, and so they did the same here. So we were, as I said, out in sticks. We weren't even like in a little village or anything. It was like a townland. So I think they were drawn to that, and they had a big area. It was very open. It was unbuilt up, and I think they liked the schools here, and they liked all the life here. And the thing that just stuns me, because when you're a kid, you don't do this kind of maths. But like, there was 1,000 people at my mum's funeral, and she'd only lived here for 6 years, you know? And for 4 of those years, she'd had cancer, coming and going and back and forth and remission and everything else. And to answer how he coped afterwards, I mean, I genuinely I don't know. I mean, it's staggering. I mean, he's a very strong, stoical kind of person, but he's also very emotional, you know, and kind of open about his feelings and stuff like that. But he just didn't, if it ever sort of phased him on a super existential level, you know, he never really let it show or barked about it. I mean, and I think he did kind of, I think I say in the book, he didn't want anyone to think he was a pity case or something. And I think he was aware that people were, you know, kind of aware that, you know, it's a story that everybody knew about. It's a very tragic story. Oh, Jesus, she was only 43 and 11 kids and that poor fella. And, you know, sometimes I was dropped home once by one of my friends, and they mentioned what had happened to me and blessed themselves. Well, you know, what happened to you. And I was like, and they didn't mean it, was so self-conscious, but I was like, am I a hex that you have to like? But I suppose in a way we were. Like, can you imagine anything sadder? And because I was at the centre of it, I didn't really see it from the outside view. So I think my dad was a very proud man, and so in a lot of ways he wanted to show, no, I'm not going to just, collapse. I'm not going to go on a drink, and any of those things which people would have forgiven him for, And he just kept going, worked every day, never took a day off work his entire life, except for obviously his holiday days when he would take us on camping holidays in a 26-foot caravan.
Any other?
Do you still have the video collection?
Yes. We have all 800, I think. Oh, actually, Kiva, do we?
Yeah, we do.
Oh, okay. Because I actually, not only that, but I've got the spreadsheet of the little things. My dad got it digitized, or not digitized, it was already digital. If everyone doesn't know this, my dad taped 800 films off a TV in a very strange move. And he didn't do it all at once. It was over the course of about 20 years. He was always very, very early adopter of all technologies and everything else. And slowly but surely we had 2 VHS recorders, and then we had 3, and I think at one time we had 4. And 3 could record at all times. And he bought towers that you would put them in. And then he also got a computer program, a very early sort of database program, which put them all in. But it put them all in with his own little comments and stuff. So it was Rex Harrison and Julie Walters in, blah, blah, blah. And then he would have his own rating system. But he'd also have these absolutely bonkers double bills, because my dad loved getting 2 films on 1 tape, because that meant you saved a bit of tape. So it meant that basically you'd have 2 films side by side, which were utterly bananas to watch together. We had RoboCop and Pride and Prejudice on the 1 tape. You'd have to be in a very specific mood. And the best, I think, A Woman's Heart, back to back with Highlander, I think. And then there was one god-awful tape that was Police Academy 4 and then Police Academy 2. So it's 2 terrible movies, out of order, without the film that separates them, which is CIA waterboarding tactics in movie form. But he wasn't even a particularly big movie buff or anything. I think he was just cheap. So, and we grew up away from Blockbuster and Extravision, so, it was good. And maybe to some extent, all joking aside, it was that same thing that I was finding. He was putting order on chaos. He was, having a little project, and he always does. He kind of got into genealogy and chasing the family tree recently as well, which he did back then. But now there's so much more information, and he's a very mechanical-minded guy. He's a practical guy, and I think to some extent that was part of it. That's me armchair psychologizing him, but he's read the book and he didn't object, so I'll take it.
Any other questions? I have one. Anyone in the family not read it? Anyone in the family kind of stepped back from the process?
No, not that I know. And generally, the response has been so much nicer than I thought it was going to. I mean, because even...
Were you worried?
Yeah, I mean, I was worried because if someone wrote a book about me, even if it was a great book, I'd still be like, I don't know about that. You'd find something to annoy you. Of course you would.
Kiva?
Yeah. Oh. Thanks, guys. I know. I did have a few, and also do you talk about people too much, or do you talk about people not enough? And there's all those kinds of worries. But more, it's just the thing I think they all were surprised by was how little I do talk about other people. I'm so self-absorbed in the book, but I think I was writing it from the point of view of a 5 to 10-year-old, so it was the only way I could really get through it was by being that very self-absorbed little person and how they react to the world. So it was a good excuse.
Did you have any book in mind when you were doing it? Just in terms of memoirs that
affected me,
struck home with you?
I have to say no, not really. I mean,
I'd say there's not many with a plot like that.
Yeah, but I do know that I was very early. I was very touched by Boy by Roald Dahl. I don't think there's any real similarity, but I loved the way he made things which were comparatively mundane. He made them really sing, and he didn't have to kind of go to great lengths to make them seem more exciting or more interesting. He was able to just describe very everyday, commonplace things, or find the absurdity in things that you do every single day, which it's stunning to me that how many people, like that bit that I read about West Side Stores and Crazy Prices goes on much longer. I was kind of cutting as I went. But like so many people have mentioned it, it's just describing a shop. But to some extent, those things, I think the work David Sedaris does very well as well. Like very mundane, the day in his life, but it's really funny and it's probing and it's insightful. So it's been people who can make the boring seem interesting.
And there's not much troubles in it,
No.
which I really liked.
Well, I suppose I was at the tail end anyway, but there is obviously a bomb that goes off the top of our road, but which was deemed so insignificant that I wasn't told about it till I was 15. Not because I was being sheltered, but because there were like 11 other IRA activities that one weekend. It was late August '88, and it...
Toilet ended up in your field?
I did, yes, the wall of a toilet, just the sink end of the toilet. Not an actual toilet, that would have been so great for the book. It was actually a metaphor for... but I think it's obviously, something that was like present the whole time. We did the checkpoints on the way into school and everything. But it wasn't, I didn't want to kind of, steal other people's stories, because I haven't had a lot of the run-ins that loads of my friends would have had if they, lived closer to town, for example. They never got a sink in their field, though.
Yeah. Seamus, thank you very much. Semas OReilly. Ladies and gentlemen. Cheers.
Thank you
very
so much.
much.
That was great.
Thank you.